On the sun-drenched shores of Estiona, a killer stalks the Golden Palm Hotel, who poisoned Major Palgrave. Why is a photograph worth killing for? Can Miss Marple, with her knitting and keen eye, unravel a web of greed and betrayal before another guest falls? Dive into a tropical mystery where every smile hides a secret. Chapter 1. Sunlit Shadows. The Caribbean sun blazed with a cheerful indifference, casting golden rays across the turquoise waters that lapped at the shores of St. Honor. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in a light shawl despite the heat, stepped gingerly from the small propeller plane onto the tarmac of the island's modest airstrip. Her rheumatism had been particularly bothersome this winter, and her nephew Raymond, ever solicitous, had insisted on this tropical escape. "Aunt Jane," he'd said, "a bit of sun will do you wonders." She wasn't entirely convinced, but the prospect of new faces and unfamiliar patterns of behavior intrigued her more than she admitted. The Golden Palm Hotel awaited, its whitewashed walls gleaming like a promise of serenity. A porter, a young man with a dazzling smile and a lilting accent, whisked her modest suitcase away, leaving Miss Marple to follow a winding path lined with hibiscus and frangipani. The air was thick with the scent of salt and blossoms, a heady contrast to the crisp familiarity of St. Mary Mead. She adjusted her straw hat, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. Already she noted the hurried gait of a hotel staff member, the way his glance darted toward a cluster of guests lounging by the pool. Nervous, she thought, but about what? At the reception, a woman with a crisp blouse and a name tag reading Celeste greeted her. "Miss Marple, welcome. Your room overlooks the babest view on the island." Her voice was warm, but her fingers tapped in uneven rhythm on the counter. Miss Marple smiled, filing the detail away. "How lovely," she said. "I do enjoy a view. Tells you so much about a place, don't you think?" Celeste's smile faltered just for a moment, before she handed over the key. The room was charming, with louvered shutters and a ceiling fan that stirred the humid air. Miss Marple unpacked her knitting, a few novels, and a photograph of her garden back home, placing them with care. She glanced out at the bay, where fishing boats bobbed like toys on the horizon. Peaceful, she mused, but peace often hides something, doesn't it? She decided to explore the hotel grounds before dinner, her curiosity already itching. The Golden Palm was a lively hive of guests, each a distinct thread in the tapestry of human nature Miss Marple so loved to unravel. By the pool, a young couple laughed too loudly, their hands entwined but their eyes wandering to other guests, to the bar, to the horizon. Newlyweds perhaps, she thought, but not entirely content. Nearby, an older man in a linen suit sat alone, his newspaper unread as he stared at the sea. His fingers gripped the armrests too tightly. Grief or guilt? Miss Marple wondered. She settled on a wicker chair beneath a palm tree, her knitting needles clicking softly. It was then that Major Palgrave approached, his face flushed from the sun or perhaps the rum punch in his hand. "Miss Marple, is it?" he boomed, dropping into the chair beside her without invitation. "Retired Major, Royal Artillery. Been coming here for years. Splendid place, splendid." His voice was hearty, but his eyes darted, as if checking. "Who might overhear?" "Delighted to meet you, Major," Miss Marple replied, her tone gentle but her gaze keen. "Esti Honor seems quite the escape. You must have stories from your visits." She knew men like Palgrave loved an audience, and she was adept at providing one. "Oh, stories. I've got dozens," he said, leaning closer. His breath carried a hint of rum and lime. This island's got its secrets, you know, not all sun and sand. He launched into a tale of a fishing boat lost in a sudden squall, his voice rising with dramatic flair. Miss Marple nodded, her needles never pausing, but her mind catalogued his words. Exaggeration, she noted, but there's truth beneath it. As Palgrave rambled, a woman approached a striking figure in a wide-brimmed hat, her dress a vivid splash of coral. "Major, you're monopolizing the new guest," she said, her voice teasing but sharp-edged. Palgrave chuckled, undeterred. "Mrs. Evelyn Hillingdon, allow me to introduce Miss Marple." Evelyn's husband's a botanist, always poking about. "In the jungle, charmed," Evelyn said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Edward's out collecting specimens today. He finds the island's flora fascinating." She lingered, her fingers toying with a pearl necklace. Miss Marple sensed a restlessness in her posture, a desire to say more but held back by propriety. "Botany sounds riveting," Miss Marple said. "I've a small garden myself. Does your husband ever share his findings?" Evelyn's expression softened, but before she could reply, Palgrave interrupted. "Speaking of findings," he said, lowering his voice, "I've something to tell you, Miss Marple, a real corker of a story." He glanced around, ensuring no one was too close. "Ever heard of a murderer who got away clean? I knew one once. Had a photograph of the blighter, too." His eyes gleamed with the thrill of gossip. Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a fraction of a second. "A murderer," she said, her tone light but her interest razor sharp. "How extraordinary. What did he do?" Palgrave leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Poison, that's what. Clever chap, used something untraceable. Struck more than once, they say, before anyone caught on. I saw him myself, years ago, in India. Had the nerve to," he stopped abruptly, his face paling as his gaze fixed on something over Miss Marple's shoulder. She turned, following his line of sight. A man stood by the bar, his back to them, pouring a drink with deliberate care. He was tall, with a crisp white shirt and an air of quiet authority. Nothing remarkable, yet Palgrave's reaction suggested otherwise. "Major," Miss Marple prompted, but he shook his head, forcing a laugh. "Lost my train of thought," he said. "Old age, you know. Must be off dinner soon." He stood, a bit too quickly, and shuffled away, leaving his rum punch half finished. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind buzzing. He saw something, or someone, she thought, and it frightened him. She resumed her knitting, her eyes scanning the crowd. The man at the bar turned, revealing a weathered face and a polite smile. He nodded at her, then joined a group of guests, blending seamlessly. Mr. Raphael, she recalled, from Celeste's brief introduction at check-in. A wealthy businessman, widowed, with a reputation for sharpness. Interesting, she thought. The evening unfolded with a buffet under the stars, the hotel's terrace alive with chatter and clinking glasses. Miss Marple, seated at a small table, observed the guests. Evelyn Hillingdon sat with her husband, Edward, a lean man with ink-stained fingers and a distracted air. Across the terrace, the young couple Greg and Lucky Dyson, she learned, argued in hushed tones, their earlier laughter gone. A local singer, her voice rich and mournful, performed a calypso tune, and Miss Marple noted how the staff moved with practiced ease, yet some avoided eye contact. She struck up a conversation with a clergyman, Canon Prescott, whose sister Joan hovered protectively. "The island's a balm for the soul," he said, but his smile was strained. Joan mentioned a local legend about a cursed spring, her tone half joking but her eyes serious. Miss Marple listened, her mind drawing parallels to tales from sea. Mary Mead. People are the same everywhere, she thought. They carry their secrets like luggage. As the night wound down, Miss Marple returned to her room, the sea breeze cooling her skin. She sat by the window, her knitting idle, and replayed Palgrave's interrupted story. A murderer, a photograph, a sudden silence. She thought of the man at the bar, Mr. Raphael, and Palgrave's fleeting panic. Something is amiss, she decided. Not the island, not the hotel, but the people. In St. Mary Mead, she'd seen how small close a glance, a pause could unravel great mysteries. Here, under the Caribbean sun, she sensed the same currents of deceit. She smiled faintly, her rheumatism forgotten. The Golden Palm was no mere holiday retreat. It was a puzzle, and Miss Marple was never one to resist a puzzle. As she prepared for bed, she made a mental note to seek out Palgrave tomorrow. His story, she suspected, was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The snapshot that wasn't. Morning sun spilled across the Golden Palm Hotel, painting the breakfast terrace in hues of amber and coral. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, a cup of tea cooling beside her untouched plate of fruit. Her eyes, sharp beneath the brim of her straw hat, flitted across the guests with the precision of a seamstress threading a needle. Major Palgrave's abrupt retreat yesterday, his half-told tale of a murderer cut short by a glance toward Mr. Raphael, lingered in her mind like a snag in her knitting. Something had unsettled him, she thought, and I intend to find out what. The terrace buzzed with morning chatter. Evelyn Hillingdon, elegant in a linen dress, sipped coffee while her husband Edward scribbled in a notebook, his brow furrowed. The Dysons, Greg and Lucky, were absent, though their empty table bore traces of a hasty departure: spilled sugar, a crumpled napkin. Canon Prescott and his sister Joan shared a quiet conversation, their heads bent close. Miss Marple noted the way Joan's hand hovered protectively over her brother's arm. Anxious, she mused, but for him or something else. Major Palgrave appeared at the far end of the terrace, his linen jacket slightly rumpled, a glass of orange juice in hand. He scanned the crowd, his jovial demeanor from yesterday replaced by a cautious edge. Miss Marple raised a hand in greeting, and he hesitated before making his way over, weaving through tables with a forced smile. "Good morning, Major," she said, her voice warm but probing. "I trust you slept well after our intriguing chat yesterday." Palgrave chuckled, though it sounded strained. "Slept like a log, Miss Marple. Too much rum punch, perhaps." He sat, his fingers drumming on the table. "About that story I started silly old yarn, nothing to it. Forget I mentioned it." Miss Marple's smile didn't waver, but her mind sharpened. He's backtracking, she thought. "Oh, but it was so fascinating," she said, her tone light as gossip. "A murderer who used poison, you said, and a photograph to prove it. I've always found such stories terribly compelling." Palgrave's eyes darted to the side, where a waiter was clearing plates. "Just an old soldier's tale," he muttered. "Exaggerated, you know how it is." He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over his glass. "Must check on something. Excuse me." Before Miss Marple could press further, a commotion erupted near the terrace entrance. Celeste, the receptionist from yesterday, hurried toward a group of staff, her face pale. "It's the Major," she called, her voice trembling. "He's collapsed up by the garden path." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained seated, her hands folding neatly over her napkin. Guests murmured, some rising to peer toward the garden. Edward Hillingdon closed his notebook with a snap, exchanging a glance with Evelyn. Canon Prescott crossed himself while Joan whispered something urgent in his ear. Miss Marple watched it all, her mind cataloguing each reaction like beads on a string. Within minutes, Dr. Graham, a kindly physician staying at the hotel, emerged from the garden path, his expression grim. He conferred with Celeste, who nodded, and hurried back to the reception. The doctor approached the terrace, addressing the guests in a measured tone. "I'm afraid Major Palgrave has passed away," he said. "It appears to be a heart attack." "Nothing to be done, I'm sorry to say." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Evelyn Hillingdon touched her pearls, her face unreadable. Greg Dyson, who had appeared with Lucky during the commotion, muttered, "Poor old chap." Lucky's hand tightened on his arm, her nails painted a vivid scarlet. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A heart attack, she thought, but so convenient after his unease yesterday. She excused herself and made her way to the garden path, her steps slow but deliberate. The staff had cordoned off the area, but Miss Marple's unassuming presence allowed her to linger unnoticed. The path wound through hibiscus bushes, their blooms vivid against the green. She spotted a bench where Palgrave might have sat, a glass of orange juice half drunk resting on the ground nearby. A small notebook lay beside it, its pages fluttering in the breeze. Curious, she thought, but she refrained from touching it, knowing the staff would soon investigate. Instead, she returned to the terrace, where Mr. Raphael now sat alone, his wheelchair positioned to catch the morning sun. His sharp eyes met hers as she approached. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice dry as parchment, "you don't strike me as one for idle sunbathing. What brings you sniffing about?" She smiled, settling into a chair beside him. "Merely observing, Mr. Raphael. A tragedy like this stirs up all sorts of thoughts, doesn't it?" He snorted, but his gaze was appraising. "Tragedy, you say? Or something else? You were chatting with Palgrave yesterday." He seemed jumpy. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression mild. "Did he? I hadn't noticed. Though he did mention a curious story, something about a murderer and a photograph. He seemed eager to share, until he wasn't." Raphael's lips twitched as if suppressing a smile. Palgrave loved his stories, probably saw a ghost in every shadow, but you, Miss Marple, you notice things, don't you? "Only what people choose to show," she replied, her tone demure but her eyes gleaming. "He's testing me," she thought, "and he knows more than he lets on." Their conversation was interrupted by Lucky Dyson, who sauntered over, her sundress swaying. "Mr. Raphael, you're hogging the new guest," she said, her voice dripping with charm. "Miss Marple, you must join us for lunch. Greg's planning a boat trip to Morro Dolphins, coral reefs, the works. Say you'll come." Miss Marple declined politely, citing her rheumatism, but she noted Lucky's forced brightness, the way her eyes flicked toward Raphael as if seeking approval. She's performing, Miss Marple thought, but for whom? As Lucky drifted away, Miss Marple turned back to Raphael. "Major Palgrave's collapse was rather sudden," she said. "I wonder if he'd been feeling unwell before." Raphael shrugged, but his fingers tightened on his cane. Old soldiers drop like flies. Too much rum, too little sense. Still, the doctor's no fool. If he says heart attack, that's that. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She recalled Palgrave's mention of poison, His sudden silence, and now his death. Too neat, she thought. And that notebook by the bench, did it hold his photograph? She resolved to inquire discreetly, perhaps through Celeste, who seemed nervous. Enough to let something slip. The afternoon brought a subdued atmosphere to the Golden Palm. Guests whispered about Palgrave's death, some speculating about his health, others dismissing it as an old man's misfortune. Miss Marple joined Canon, Prescott, and Joan for tea, steering the conversation toward the island's history. "Such a peaceful place," she said, "though I suppose every paradise has its shadows." Joan's teacup rattled in its saucer. Shadows. "Oh, you mean the old tales, curses, ghosts. Silly stuff, really." But her eyes darted to her brother, who was staring at his plate. "Every place has its stories," Canon Prescott said softly. "Palgrave liked to tell them, didn't he? Always something dramatic." Miss Marple smiled, sensing their discomfort. "He did mention a photograph yesterday," she said casually. "Something about a case he'd seen. I wonder if he kept it in that notebook of his." Joan's face tightened, but Canon Prescott spoke quickly. "He was always scribbling in that thing. Probably just old war stories." He changed the subject to the island's churches, and Miss Marple let it go, her suspicions deepening. As evening fell, Miss Marple strolled to the reception, where Celeste was sorting papers. "Such a sad day," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "Did the Major seem unwell when you saw him this morning?" Celeste hesitated, her fingers pausing. "He was fine, I think. Asked for extra juice, said he was parched. Then he went to the garden." Her voice trailed off, and she busied herself with a ledger. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. Parched, she thought, and then a collapse. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, a farmer who'd died after drinking tainted cider. Poison could be so subtle, she mused, and so easily mistaken. Back in her room, she sat by the window, the sea a dark expanse beyond. Palgrave's death, his story of a poisoner, the notebook, the glass of juicet, all swirled in her mind, like a pattern, half-knit, she thought, of Mr. Raphael's probing questions, Lucky's forced cheer, Joan's unease. Someone knows something, she decided. And that notebook, if it held the photograph Palgrave mentioned, might hold the key. She tucked her shawl around her shoulders, a faint smile playing on her lips. The Golden Palm was no longer just a retreat. It was a chessboard, and Miss Marple was ready to make her next move. Chapter 3. Whispers in the palms. The Caribbean dawn painted the Golden Palm Hotel in soft pinks and golds. But to Miss Jane Marple, seated on her balcony with a cup of Earl Grey, the beauty felt like a veneer over something darker. Major Palgrave's sudden death, officially a heart attack, gnawed at her like a dropped stitch in a scarf. His tale of a poisoner, his unease at Mr. Raphael's presence, and the notebook by the garden benchel pointed to a truth the island's sunlit charm seemed eager to conceal. People hide their secrets in plain sight, she thought, but they always leave threads to pull. Breakfast was quieter today, the guests subdued by yesterday's tragedy. Miss Marple chose a table near the edge of the terrace, her knitting bag at her side, her eyes scanning the crowd. Evelyn Hillingdon sat alone, her coffee untouched, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Edward, her botanist husband, was absent, likely foraging in the island's lush interior. Greg and Lucky Dyson whispered heatedly at their table, their voices low but sharp. Canon Prescott and his sister Joan were missing, perhaps attending a morning service. Miss Marple noted a new phaser young woman in a staff uniform, her movements hesitant as she cleared plates. New help or a replacement? She wondered. Her attention shifted as Mr. Raphael rolled onto the terrace, his wheelchair gliding silently. He paused near her table, his sharp eyes glinting. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice like dry leaves, "you're up early for a holiday maker, plotting a swim or something more inquisitive." She smiled, her needles clicking softly. "Merely enjoying the morning, Mr. Raphael, though I find people far more interesting than the sea. Don't you?" he chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "People are trouble, always scheming, hiding something. Take Palgrave, ways blathering about his past. Heart gave out, they say, but you don't buy it, do you?" Miss Marple's expression remained mild. "I'm sure Dr. Graham knows his. Business still, sudden deaths do make one wonder. The Major was about to show me a photograph. You know, a rather curious one." Raphael's fingers tightened on his cane, but his face betrayed nothing. "Photographs," he said. "Old men. And their mementos. Probably some faded war buddy." He changed the subject, asking about her plans for the day, but Miss Marple sensed his deflection. "He's curious about me," she thought, "but why?" Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of Celeste, the receptionist, who approached with a strained smile. "Miss Marple, we're organizing a memorial for Major Palgrave tomorrow. Nothing formal, just a gathering by the garden. Would you like to contribute a few words?" "How thoughtful," Miss Marple said. "I barely knew him, but I'd be happy to say something." She paused, then added, "I noticed a notebook near where he collapsed. Did anyone retrieve it? It seemed important to him." Celeste's smile faltered, her hands twisting a napkin. "Notebook? I don't know. The staff cleaned the area, but I'll ask." She hurried away, her steps too quick for composure. Interesting, Miss Marple thought. She excused herself from Raphael and wandered toward the garden path, her pace leisurely but her purpose keen. The bench where Palgrave had died was empty now, the glass of juice and notebook gone. She knelt, pretending to adjust her sandal, and noticed a faint stain on the ground orange, like juice, but with an odd sheen, spilled in haste. She wondered, she straightened, her mind turning over possibilities. Poison could be disguised in a drink, especially one as innocuous as juice. Back at the hotel, she sought out the young staff member she'd seen earlier, a girl named Leela with a shy demeanor and quick hands. Lila was polishing silverware in a side room, her eyes darting nervously as Miss Marple approached. "Good morning, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone grandmotherly. "You must be new here. It's a lovely hotel, but I imagine it's quite busy." Leela nodded, her fingers fumbling a spoon. "Started this week, ma'am. It's a lot." Her accent carried the island's lilt, but her voice trembled. "I'm sure you're doing splendidly," Miss Marple said. "Did you know Major Palgrave? Such a sad loss." Lila's eyes widened, and she dropped the spoon with a clatter. I saw him yesterday, ma'am. He was talking loud, like always. Asked for juice, said he was feeling funny." She hesitated, then whispered, "I didn't tell anyone, but he looked scared." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained serene. Scared. "Poor man, did he say why?" Leela shook her head, glancing toward the door. "No, ma'am. Just said he needed to find something, a picture, I think. Then he went to the garden." "Thank you, Lila," Miss Marple said, patting her arm. "You've been most helpful." As she left, She filed away Leela's words. A picture. The photograph again. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a frightened woman's diary had revealed a killer's identity. Fear leaves traces, she thought. At lunch, Miss Marple joined Evelyn Hillingdon, who seemed grateful for the company. "Edward's off on one of his expeditions," Evelyn said, her voice tinged with weariness. "He's obsessed with a rare orchid up in the hills. Leaves me to entertain myself." "It must be lonely," Miss Marple said, her tone sympathetic, "though I find people watching quite diverting. The Major, for instance, he had such stories. Did he ever share one with you?" Evelyn's fork paused mid-air. "He was always talking," she said carefully. "War stories, mostly. Nothing memorable." But her eyes flicked toward the terrace, where Greg and Lucky were now seated. Their argument replaced by an uneasy silence. Miss Marple followed her gaze. Greg was staring at his plate, while Lucky toyed with a bracelet, her smile brittle. Trouble there, Miss Marple thought. She steered the conversation to lighter topics. But Evelyn's distraction confirmed her suspicions. The guests were hiding something, whether about Palgrave or themselves. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple took a shaded path behind the hotel, where palms whispered in the breeze. She paused near a cluster of bougainvillea, her ears catching a low, heated exchange. She peered through the foliage, spotting Greg Dyson and a man she hadn't met, a local. Judging by his attire, with a weathered face and a tense posture. "You promised it was handled," Greg hissed. "Now look what's happened." The man muttered something inaudible, then stalked away, leaving Greg to rake a hand through his hair. Miss Marple waited until he'd gone before emerging, her mind racing. A secret meeting, she thought, and connected to Palgrave's death, that evening. At dinner, the atmosphere was strained. Canon Prescott and Joan returned, their faces drawn, as if the day's events weighed heavily. Miss Marple joined them, sensing an opportunity. "Such a shock about the Major," she said. "I keep thinking of that notebook he carried. Did either of you ever see it?" Joan's lips tightened, but Canon Prescott answered smoothly. He was always jotting things down, probably just old memories. His voice was calm, but his knuckles whitened around his fork. Miss Marple nodded, letting the topic drop. She excused herself early, retiring to her room to reflect. The pieces were scattered: Palgrave's fear, the missing notebook, Lila's mention of a picture, Greg's clandestine meeting, Celeste's nervousness, Raphael's probing questions, and that stain by the bench, too glossy for mere juice. Poison, she thought, or something close. She recalled a St. Mary Mead gardener who'd died after ingesting a mislabeled herbicide, mistaken for tea. Mistakes can be orchestrated, she mused. As she gazed at the moonlit sea, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill. The Golden Palm was a web of secrets, and Palgrave's death was no accident. She would watch, listen, and wait. The truth, she knew, always surfaced like a bubble in still water. Chapter 4. Poison in Paradise. The midday sun hung heavy over Estiona, its heat pressing against the Golden Palm Hotel like a velvet curtain. Miss Jane Marple sat in the shade of a tamarind tree, her knitting needles idle in her lap, her eyes tracing the movements of guests and staff. Major Palgrave's death, officially a heart attack, but unofficially a murder in her mind, had cast a subtle shadow over the hotel. The notebook, the glossy stain by the bench, Leela's mention of Palgrave's fear, and Greg Dyson's secretive meeting all were threads in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. In St. Mary Mead, she thought, secrets bubble up like springs. Here they hide in the heat. The morning had brought a new disturbance. At breakfast, Miss Marple had overheard whispers of a guest taken ill, Mrs. Joan Prescott, the canon's sister, who'd been rushed to her room after collapsing during a morning walk. The news, murmured among the staff, was that she'd recovered. But Miss Marple's instincts prickled. Another sudden illness, she thought, and so soon after Palgrave. She recalled his tale of a poisoner, a killer who struck repeatedly with untraceable means. Could it be happening again? She decided to visit Joan, armed with a basket of fruit from the hotel's buffet as an excuse. The Prescott's room was on the second floor, its balcony draped with bougainvillea. Canon Prescott answered her knock, his face etched with worry. "Miss Marple, how kind," he said, ushering her inside. "Joan's resting, but she's much better." Joan lay propped on pillows, her complexion pale but her eyes alert. "Just a dizzy spell," she said, waving a hand. "The heat, you." "No," but her fingers plucked at the bedspread. A nervous tick, Miss Marple noted. "I'm so relieved," Miss Marple said, setting the basket on a table. "These islands can be overwhelming. I do hope it was nothing serious. Did you eat or drink anything unusual this morning?" Joan's eyes flickered, but Canon Prescott answered. "Just tea and toast, same as always. Dr. Graham says it's likely dehydration." His tone was firm, but Miss Marple caught a glance between them, swift, guarded. "Dr. Graham seems very capable," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "though I wonder if he checked for other causes. After poor Major Palgrave, one does become cautious." The room grew still. Joan's hand stilled on the bedspread, and Canon Prescott's jaw tightened. "Palgrave was an old man," he said. "Heart trouble, they said. Nothing more." "Of course," Miss Marple said, smiling. "Still, it's curious how quickly things happen here." She let the comment hang, then excused herself, her mind buzzing. "They're hiding something," she thought. "Fear, perhaps, or knowledge." Back on the terrace, Miss Marple sought out Leela, the young staff member who'd spoken of Palgrave's fear. She found her near the pool, refilling water jugs. "Lila dear," Miss Marple said, "you've been so helpful. I wonder if you saw Mrs. Prescott this morning, before her spell." Lila hesitated, her pitcher trembling slightly. I brought her tea, ma'am. She was fine then, talking with that lady Mrs. Dyson. They were by the fountain, laughing. About something." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Mrs. Dyson lucky. How nice. Did they seem close?" Leela shrugged, her eyes darting away. "Not really. Mrs. Dyson left quick, like she was in a hurry. Mrs. Prescott drank her tea, then went for her walk." She paused, then whispered, "There's talk among the staff, ma'am. They say the island's got bad spirits. First the Major, now this." Miss Marple patted her hand. "No spirits, dear, just people. Thank you. Lucky and Joan," she thought, an unlikely pair. She recalled Lucky's brittle cheer, her husband Greg's secretive meeting. Connections, always connections. Determined to explore further, Miss Marple wandered to the hotel's library, a quiet room lined with dog-eared novels and local histories. There she found Edward Hillingdon, his nose buried in a botanical journal. His ink-stained fingers and distracted air suggested a man more at ease with plants than people. "Mr. Hillingdon," she said, settling nearby, "your work sounds fascinating. Have you found anything unusual in the island's flora?" Edward looked up, blinking as if surprised to be addressed. Oh yes, the jungle's full of with medicinal properties, others with less benign effects. His voice was soft, but his eyes held a flicker of caution. Less benign, Miss Marple said, her tone curious but innocent. You mean poisonous plants? How intriguing. I suppose one must be careful what one picks. He nodded, closing his journal. Very careful. Some toxins mimic natural causes, heart failure, dizziness, hard to trace. He stood abruptly, murmuring an excuse about a meeting, and left. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Toxins that mimic heart failure, she thought. Like Palgrave's death, like Joan's collapse. She recalled a St. Mary Mead in gardener poisoned by foxglove, mistaken for a heart attack. Nature hides its weapons well. Her next encounter came unexpectedly. As she left the library, she nearly collided with Greg Dyson, who was pacing near the entrance, his face flushed. Miss Marple, he said, forcing a smile. Enjoying the island. Very much, she said. Though it's been rather eventful. Poor Mrs. Prescott's illness, so soon after the major. It makes one wonder about the water, or perhaps the tea. Greg's smile faltered. Tea, just bad luck. I'd say island's fine. He excused himself, his stride too brisk to be casual. Miss Marple's suspicions deepened. She sought out Dr. Graham, finding him in the hotel's small clinic, reviewing notes. Dr. Graham, she said, I do hope Mrs. Prescott is recovering. Such a strange coincidence, her collapse after the major's passing. The doctor adjusted. His glasses, his expression kind but guarded. Coincidence, yes. She's stable now likely, heat stroke or low blood sugar. Nothing to worry about. And the major, Miss Marple pressed gently. Was his heart condition well known? Dr. Graham hesitated. He'd mentioned chest pains before, common at his age. The autopsy, well, there wasn't one, given the circumstances. No need. Miss Marple nodded, but her mind raced. No autopsy. Convenient. She thanked him and left, her thoughts turning to the stain by the bench, Leela's mention of juice, and now Joan's tea. Poison, she thought, slipped into something ordinary. That evening, at a quiet dinner, Miss Marple sat near Evelyn Hillingdon, who seemed more subdued than usual. Edward's been out late again, Evelyn said, her voice low. He's obsessed with some plant he found. Says it could be a breakthrough. How exciting, Miss Marple said, though I imagine he's careful with his specimens. Some plants can be dangerous, can't they? Evelyn's fork paused. He's meticulous, always labeling everything. Her tone was flat, but her eyes held a shadow of unease. As dinner ended, Miss Marple overheard a hushed exchange near the bar. Lucky Dyson, her voice sharp, was speaking to a staff member, tall man with a scar on his cheek. You said it was safe, she whispered. Now, look what's happened. The man muttered a reply and slipped away into the shadows. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Another secret conversation, she thought, and Lucky at the centre. She recalled Leela's mention of Lucky with Joan before the collapse. Is she the thread that ties it all together? In her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, the sea a restless murmur below. She pieced together the day's clues, Joan's collapse. Edward's talk of toxins, Greg's unease, Lucky's whispered argument, the lack of an autopsy. Palgrave's story of a poisoner loomed large, its shadow stretching over the hotel. She thought of a St. Mary Mead widow who'd poisoned her husband's tea, her calm demeanour hiding a lethal intent. The calmest faces hide the darkest secrets, she mused. She drew a mental map of motives, jealousy, greed, fear of exposure. Joan's collapse, so like Palgrave's death, suggested a pattern. A poisoner at work, she thought, and they're growing bolder. She resolved to watch Lucky closely, to probe Edward's botanical knowledge, and to find that notebook, if it still existed. As the moon rose, Miss Marple felt a quiet resolve. The golden palm was a puzzle, its pieces scattered but coming into focus. She would tug at the threads, gently but firmly, until the truth unraveled. Chapter 5. The Unseen Watcher. The Caribbean night was alive, with the hum of cicadas and the distant rhythm of waves. But Miss Jane Marple sat awake in her room at the Golden Palm Hotel, her knitting untouched on the table. The events of the past, Daysmager, Palgrave's sudden death, Joan Prescott's collapse, the whispers of poison, and the elusive notebook wove a pattern in her mind, intricate and troubling. A poisoner, she thought, slipping through the cracks of this sunlit paradise. The glossy stain by the bench, Edward Hillingdon's talk of toxic plants, and Lucky Dyson's secretive exchange all pointed to a truth that refused to stay buried. In St. Mary Mead, she'd seen how secrets festered in quiet corners. Here, they hid in the open, masked by smiles and sea breezes. Determined to uncover more, Miss Marple resolved to enlist an ally. Mr. Raphael, with his sharp mind and commanding presence, was the obvious choice. His probing questions and guarded demeanor suggested he saw more than he let on. At breakfast, she found him alone by the terrace, his wheelchair angled to catch the morning light. His eyes flicked up as she approached, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Miss Marple," he said, "you're up early again. Chasing shadows, or just the coffee?" She smiled, settling beside him with her tea. "Shadows, I'm afraid, Mr. Raphael. They're more revealing than coffee. I've been thinking about poor Major Palgrave and Mrs. Prescott's illness. Curious how misfortune clusters." Raphael's smirk faded, his gaze sharpening. "Curious, yes. You've got a nose for trouble, haven't you? What's on your mind?" Miss Marple leaned closer, her voice low. "The Major mentioned a photograph a murderer," he said. "Then he died. Mrs. Prescott falls ill, and there's talk of tea, juice, plants. I wonder if someone here knows more than they should. There was a notebook by the bench where the Major collapsed. I'd like to see it." Raphael's fingers tapped his cane, a slow, deliberate rhythm. "A notebook. You think it's the key to your little theory?" "Perhaps," she said, her tone mild. "But I'm only a visitor, with no authority to poke about. You, however, have a certain influence." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You're a sly one. All right, I'll ask the staff. But don't expect miracles. Things disappear on islands like this." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "And be careful, Miss Marple. Poking at secrets can stir up hornets." She nodded, undeterred. He's intrigued, she thought, and he'll help, whether he admits it or not. After breakfast, Raphael summoned Celeste, the receptionist, who arrived with a nervous smile. "Mr. Raphael, Miss Marple," she said, "is everything all right?" "The notebook," Raphael said brusquely. "The one by the bench where Palgrave died." "Where is it?" Celeste's hands twisted her apron. I don't know, sir. The staff cleaned the area. It might have been taken to lost and found or thrown out." Miss Marple interjected gently. "Could you check, my dear? It might mean something to the Major's family." Celeste nodded, hurrying away. Raphael raised an eyebrow. "You're good at that, playing the sweet old lady, but you're not fooling me." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I only ask questions, Mr. Raphael. The answers do the rest. With Raphael's help secured, Miss Marple turned her attention to the hotel's records. If the notebook was gone, perhaps other clues lingered in Palgrave's interactions. She approached the front desk later that morning, where a clerk named Marcus, a young man with a meticulous air, was sorting mail. "Good morning," she said. "I was wondering if Major Palgrave left any messages or requests before his passing. For the memorial, you see, I'd like to say something personal." Marcus hesitated, then checked a ledger. "He did ask for a safe deposit box a few days ago," he said. "Said he had something valuable, paper maybe, but he never came back to store it." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "A paper, the photograph. Did he mention what it was?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Just said it was private." Marcus lowered his voice. He seemed jittery, kept looking over his shoulder. "Thank you, Marcus," she said, her mind racing, jittery like Lila said. He was afraid of someone. She recalled a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who'd hidden a ledger before his death, fearing blackmail. Secrets have weight, she thought. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a stroll along the hotel's beachfront, her parasol shielding her from the sun. The sand glittered like crushed diamonds, but her thoughts were on darker matters. As she passed a cluster of palm trees, she noticed Edward Hillingdon, his satchel slung over his shoulder, emerging from a trail. His shirt was streaked with dirt, his expression distracted. "Mr. Hillingdon," she called, "found any more of those fascinating plants?" He started, then forced a smile. "Just cataloguing, Miss Marple. The island's a treasure trove. Found a vine today could be medicinal," or he trailed off, his eyes flicking to the hotel. "Or dangerous," she prompted, her tone innocent. "You mentioned toxins yesterday. It must be quite a responsibility, handling such things." Edward nodded, his fingers tightening on his satchel. "It is I keep everything locked away. Can't be too careful." He excused himself, his steps hurried. Miss Marple watched him go, her suspicions deepening. Locked away, but not always, she thought. She recalled his wife Evelyn's unease, her cryptic comments about Edward's obsession. Is he hiding more than plants? As dusk settled, Miss Marple decided on a bold mover. Nighttime walk to test her theory that someone was watching. She slipped out after dinner, her shawl wrapped tightly, and followed a path toward the garden where Palgrave had died. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine, the moonlight casting long shadows. She moved slowly, her senses alert, her heart steady despite the risk. Near the bench, she paused, pretending to admire a flowering shrub. A rustle in the foliage made her breath catch. She turned, catching a glimpse of a figure tall, cloaked in shadow, slipping behind a palm. Not my imagination, she thought. She continued walking, her steps deliberate, until she reached a clearing. Another rustle, closer now, confirmed her suspicion. Someone's following me. She returned to her room, locking the door, her mind alight. The watcher knows I'm asking questions, she thought. She considered the guests, Greg's secrecy, whispered arguments, Edward's guardedness, the Prescott's tension. Even Raphael, with his probing eyes, wasn't above suspicion. But the figure in the shadows suggested someone bolder, someone desperate. Before retiring, she jotted notes in her journal, a habit from St. Mary Mead. Notebook missing. Safe deposit box unclaimed. Toxic plants. A watcher in the dark. She thought of Joan's collapse, so like Palgrave's death, and the stain by the bench. Poison administered by someone close. She recalled a village nurse who'd poisoned a patient, her calm hands betraying no hint of malice. The killer is here, she thought, and they're watching. As she extinguished her lamp, Miss Marple felt a quiet thrill. The Golden Palm was a stage, its players hiding their roles. The watcher's presence confirmed she was close to the truth. Tomorrow, she would press harder, perhaps with Raphael's help, perhaps alone. The net was tightening, and she was ready to pull the next thread. Chapter 6. Tangled lies the Caribbean morning, shimmered with a deceptive calm. The Golden Palm Hotel bathed in sunlight that belied the shadows Miss Jane Marple sensed beneath its surface. Her nighttime encounter with the unseen watcher had sharpened her resolve, confirming that her inquiries were rattling someone. Major Palgrave's death, Joan Prescott's collapse, the missing notebook, Edward Hillingdon's cryptic talk of toxins, and the whispered secrets of Greg and Lucky Dysonall pointed to a poisoner weaving a deadly web. In St. Mary Mead, she thought, lies tangle like ivy. Here, they're woven into the breeze. Tonight, she would test the threads. Pulling gently to see which snapped, Miss Marple began her day with a visit to Mr. Raphael, her unlikely ally. She found him in the hotel's shaded courtyard, sipping black coffee and scowling at a newspaper. "Miss Marple," he said, folding the paper, "you look like a woman with a plan. What's brewing in that sharp mind of yours?" She smiled, settling beside him. "Merely a curiosity, Mr. Raphael. I've been thinking about our guests. Interesting stories they tell. I wonder if we might learn more by stirring the pot a little." Raphael's eyes gleamed. "Stirring, eh? You want to shake them up, see who flinches. I like it. What's your move?" "A dinner," she said, her voice soft but firm. "A casual gathering where we might share a few observations. You could host, perhaps. Your presence carries weight." He chuckled, a dry rasp. "Using me as bait, are you? Fine, I'll arrange it, but you'd better have some choice words to rattle their cages." Miss Marple nodded, her plan taking shape. A dinner, she thought, where tongues loosen and masks slip. She spent the morning discreetly observing, noting the guests' routines. Evelyn Hillingdon lingered by the pool, her gaze distant, while Edward returned from another jungle trek, his satchel heavier than usual. Greg and Lucky Dyson kept their distance from each other, their earlier arguments replaced by a strained politeness. Canon Prescott and Joan attended a local church service, their absence noted by the staff. Lila, the nervous maid, avoided Miss Marple's eye, her hands trembling as she polished glassware at noon. Miss Marple sought out Dr. Graham, hoping to probe further into Joan's collapse. She found him in the hotel's small lounge, reviewing a medical journal. "Dr. Graham," she said, "I do hope Mrs. Prescott is fully recovered. It's unsettling, two incidents so close together." The doctor looked up, his expression kind, but cautious. "She's fine now, Miss Marple. Just a passing ailment. The island's climate can be hard on some." "And Major Palgrave?" she asked, her tone innocent. "Did you ever find any medication he might have taken? I heard he'd asked for juice that morning. Perhaps something in it disagreed with him." Double quotes. Dr. Graham's fingers paused on the journal. "Juice. No, nothing unusual. His heart was weak, that's all. No need to speculate." But his eyes flickered, and Miss Marple noted it. "He's uneasy," she thought. "He knows more than he says." She thanked him and left, her thoughts turning to the dinner. Raphael had arranged it for that evening, a small affair in the hotel's private dining room. Miss Marple spent the afternoon preparing choosing her words with care. She recalled a St. Mary Mead tea party where a careless remark had exposed a thief. Tonight, she would wield her observations like a scalpel. The dining room was intimate, its walls adorned with local art, the table set with crystal and hibiscus centerpieces. Raphael presided at the head, his wheelchair a throne of authority. The guests included the Hillingdons, the Dysons, the Prescotts, and Dr. Graham, each seated with a mix of curiosity and unease. Miss Marple, in a simple lavender dress, took her place near Raphael, her knitting bag at her feet as the first courser. Chilled avocado soup was served. Raphael raised his glass. "To Major Palgrave," he said, "and 2 pleasant evenings, free of misfortune." The toast was met with murmurs, but Miss Marple noted the tension in Joan's smile. The way Greg's hand tightened around his fork. The conversation began. Lightly, with talk of the islands, beaches, and markets. Miss Marple waited, then seized her moment during a lull. "It's strange," she said, her voice gentle, "how stories linger. Major Palgrave told me such a fascinating tale about a murderer, someone who used poison so cleverly it went unnoticed. He said he had a photograph to prove it." The room stilled. Evelyn's spoon clattered against her bowl. Greg coughed, reaching for his water. Joan's face paled, and Canon Prescott gripped her hand. Lucky's smile froze, her eyes darting to her husband. Dr. Graham cleared his throat, but said nothing. Only Raphael seemed amused, his gaze fixed on Miss Marple. "How intriguing," Evelyn said, her voice too bright. "He loved his stories, didn't he? Probably just a yarn." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, "but he seemed so certain. He was about to show me the photograph when he stopped. I wonder if anyone else saw it." Greg shifted in his seat. "Old men exaggerate," he said, "probably some blurry snapshot from his army days." Joan nodded, her voice faint. "He was always talking about the past. Nothing serious, I'm sure." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes scanning their faces. "They're all hiding something," she thought. She pressed further, her tone casual. "And then poor Mrs. Prescott's illness, it does make one wonder about what we eat or drink here. Tea juice. So easy to mistake one thing for another." Lucky's laugh was sharp, almost brittle. "You're full of theories, Miss Marple. It's just the tropics people get sick, right, Doctor?" Dr. Graham nodded, but his fingers toyed with his napkin. "Quite common," he said. "No need for alarm." The dinner continued, but the air was thick with unease. Miss Marple let the conversation drift, her words planted like seeds. As dessert was served, she caught Raphael's eye, and he gave a subtle nod. He sees it too, she thought, the cracks. In their stories, after dinner, as the guests dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, overhearing a tense exchange between Greg and Lucky near the terrace. "You said it was under control," Lucky hissed, her voice low. Now she's asking questions. Greg's reply was inaudible, but his gesture was sharp, dismissive. They parted quickly, unaware of Miss Marple's quiet presence in the shadows. Another secret, she thought, and Lucky's at the heart of it. She returned to her room, her mind alight with the evening's revelations. The guests' reactions, Velen's clatter, Greg's cough, Joan's pallor confirmed her suspicions. Someone feared exposure, and the photograph, if it existed, was the key. She thought of Raphael's amusement, his willingness to play along. "He's more than an ally," she mused. "He's a player in this game." Before bed, she visited the front desk, where Marcus, the clerk, was closing up. "Marcus," she said, "did you ever find that notebook from the garden? or anything from the Major's safe deposit box. He shook his head, his expression uneasy. Nothing, ma'am. But I heard the staff talking. They found a bottle of medicine in the Major's room, half empty. Threw it out, they said. Didn't seem important. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Medicine, like poison, can be slipped into anything. She thanked him, her thoughts racing. She recalled a St. Mary Mead chemist who'd swapped laudanum for a cough syrup, nearly killing a patient. The simplest disguises are the deadliest in her room. She sat by the window, the sea a silver ribbon under the moon. The dinner had exposed fault lines, fear, guilt, deflection. Greg and Lucky's argument, the missing medicine, the photograph, that never surfaced all pointed to a killer close at hand. They know I'm watching, she thought, and they're nervous. Not Miss Marple's fingers traced the edge of her knitting bag, her resolve firm. The golden palm was a maze of lies, but she was closing in. Tomorrow she would tug harder, perhaps confronting Lucky or probing Edward's locked satchel. The truth was near, and she would find it, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 7. The trap is set. The Caribbean sun rose with a fierce clarity, casting sharp shadows across the Golden Palm Hotel. Miss Jane Marple sat on her balcony, a cup of tea cooling beside her, her mind weaving through the threads of the mystery that had ensnared her. Major Palgrave's death, Joan Prescott's collapse, the missing notebook, the discarded medicine bottle, and the nervous reactions at last night's dinner all pointed to a poisoner hiding among the guests. The whispered arguments of Greg and Lucky Dyson, Edward Hillingdon's guarded talk of toxic plants, and the unseen watcher in the shadows confirmed her suspicions. The killer was close, and her probing was making them reckless. In St. Mary Mead, she thought, a trap catches the fox. Here, I must bait the snake. Miss Marple knew she needed to act decisively. The dinner had rattled the guests, exposing their fears, but it wasn't enough. She needed to flush the killer out, to force a mistake. With Mr. Raphael's influence, she could orchestrate a subtle provocation, one that would push the guilty to betray themselves. She found him in the hotel's gazebo, his wheelchair positioned to overlook the turquoise bay, his expression one of wry amusement. "Miss Marple," he said, "you've got that look again, like a cat eyeing a canary. What's your next move?" She settled beside him, her knitting bag at her feet. "I believe it's time to stir the waters, Mr. Raphael. The killer is nervous, and nervous people make errors. I'd like to share a theory publicly, but carefully. Will you help me spread it?" Raphael's eyes narrowed, but a smile tugged at his lips. "You're playing a dangerous game. What's this theory of yours?" "That Major Palgrave's death was no accident," she said, her voice low. "I'll suggest he was poisoned, that his photograph pointed to someone here, and that Joan's illness was a second attempt. I'll say I've found a clue, a piece of paper, perhaps, that the killer thought was lost. If you spread the word, it might reach the right ears." Raphael leaned back, his fingers drumming his cane. "Bold. You're betting they'll panic." "I'll do it. Whisper it to the staff. Let it ripple. But watch your back, Miss Marple. Snakes strike when cornered." She nodded, her resolve firm. A calculated risk, she thought. She recalled a St. Mary Mead gossip who'd exposed a blackmailer by spreading a half-truth. The same tactic could work here. With Raphael's agreement, she began to lay her trap. That morning, Miss Marple visited the hotel's lounge, where she found Evelyn Hillingdon sketching on a notepad, her strokes sharp and restless. "Mrs. Hillingdon," Miss Marple said, "such a lovely talent. Did Major Palgrave ever show you his photographs? He mentioned one to me, a rather shocking one. Evelyn's pencil snapped, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Photographs, she said, her voice tight. No, he never showed me anything. Just stories, always stories. She stood, gathering her things. Excuse me, I need some air, Miss. Marple watched her go, noting the tremor in her hands. She's afraid, she thought, but of what or whom? She moved to the terrace, where Canon Prescott was reading a prayer book. Canon, she said, I've been thinking about the Major. He told me of a murderer, and now I hear there was a paper in his room, something he meant to share. It's troubling, don't you think? The Canon's book slipped, his face paling. A paper, I wouldn't know. He was always scribbling. He glanced toward the hotel, where Joan was emerging, her steps slow but steady. Joan's. Better, thank God. No need to dwell on rumors. Miss Marple smiled, letting the seed take root. She approached Lila, the maid, who was sweeping the veranda. Lila dear, she said, did you hear about a paper found in the Major's room? Something about a photograph, perhaps. I wonder if it's still here. Lila's broom paused, her eyes wide. A paper? No, ma'am, I didn't hear. But the staff, they're talking. They say you're asking too many questions. She bit her lip, then hurried away. Good, Miss Marple thought. The rumor is spreading. By afternoon, Raphael had done his part, murmuring to Celeste and Marcus about Miss Marple's discovery of a paper tied to Palgrave's death. The hotel buzzed. With whispers, the guests' glances sharper, their conversations clipped. As evening approached, Miss Marple prepared for the next phase. She joined the guests for cocktails by the pool, where the air was thick with tension. Greg and Lucky Dyson stood apart, their smiles strained. Edward Hillingdon sipped a drink, his eyes on his wife, who avoided his gaze. Joan and Canon Prescott sat close, their heads bent in quiet discussion. Dr. Graham circulated, his demeanor calm but his hands restless. Miss Marple chose her moment, raising her voice just enough to carry. It's such a pity about Major Palgrave, she said to no one in particular. I keep thinking of that paper he mentioned, a clue to a murderer, he said. I heard it was found in his room, with a photograph. I do hope it's safe. The effect was immediate. Greg spilled his drink, cursing under his breath. Lucky's glass trembled, her laugh too loud. Edward's jaw tightened, his fingers crushing a napkin. Joan gasped, then covered it with a cough. Dr. Graham's smile faltered, his eyes darting to Raphael, who watched with barely concealed amusement. Before anyone could respond, a scream pierced the air. It came from the poolside bar, where Lila stood, clutching a tray, her face ashen. It's Mr. Dyson, she cried. He's sick. Miss Marple's heart raced as she followed the crowd to the bar. Greg was slumped in a chair, his face flushed, his breathing shallow. Dr. Graham knelt beside him, loosening his collar. He's had a shock, the doctor said. Or something in his drink, too much rum, perhaps. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Or something else. She noticed a glass on the bar, its contents a murky amber. She recalled the glossy stain by Palgrave's bench, Joan's tea, and now this. Poison, again. She stepped closer, her voice calm. Dr. Graham, might it be wise to keep that glass? For testing, perhaps. The doctor hesitated, then nodded, setting the glass aside. Lucky hovered nearby, her hands wringing. He's fine, she said, her voice shrill. Just too much. Son, Miss Marple caught Raphael's eye, and he gave a subtle nod. The trap worked, she thought. Someone acted, and quickly. As Greg was helped to his room, Miss Marple lingered, her mind racing. The poisoner had struck again, but this time she'd been ready. She approached the bar, where Lila was trembling. "Lila," she whispered, "did you see who poured Mr. Dyson's drink?" Lila's eyes darted to the crowd, then back. "It was one of the staff, ma'am. The tall one, with the scar. He's new, like me." She hesitated, then added, "He was talking to Mrs. Dyson earlier." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The scarred man Lucky's contact. She thanked Lila and returned to her room, her thoughts awhirl. The trap had revealed the poison's source, a staff member, linked to Lucky. She recalled a St. Mary Mead barmaid who'd slipped arsenic into a rival's ale. Her motive, jealousy. Motive here is murkier, she thought, but it's close. She sat. By her window, the sea, a restless murmur below. The evening's events, Greg's collapse, the scarred man, Lucky's panic, confirmed the killer's desperation. The photograph, the notebook, the medicine bottle were pieces of a puzzle nearly complete. They thought they'd silenced Palgrave, she mused, but they didn't count on me. Miss Marple's resolve hardened. She would find the scarred man, confront Lucky, and uncover the poison's source. The net was closing, and she was ready to pull it tight. Chapter 8. Victory in the Tropics. The Caribbean dawn broke with a serene glow. The Golden Palm Hotel, awash in hues of rose and gold. Miss Jane Marple stood on her balcony, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders, her eyes tracing the horizon. Where sea met sky. The events of the past days. Marja Palgrave's murder, Joan Prescott's collapse, Greg Dyson's near-fatal poisoning, and the web of lies spun by the guests had led her to this moment. Her trap, baited with a rumor of a found paper, had provoked the killer's reckless move. And now, with Mr. Raphael's support, she was ready to unmask the poisoner. In St. Mary Mead, she thought, truth rises like cream. Here it emerges from the shadows. Miss Marple had spent the night piecing together the final threads. The glossy stain by Palgrave's bench, the missing notebook, the discarded medicine bottle, Edward Hillingdon's toxic plants, Lucky Dyson's whispered secrets, and the scarred staff member who'd poured Greg's tainted drink. Lila's testimony had pointed to the man, and Miss Marple suspected he was a pawn in a larger game. The killer is among the guests, she thought, and Lucky is the key. She met Raphael in the hotel's courtyard, where he sat with a rare air of anticipation. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice sharp, "you've got that look like a hunter closing in. Ready to name your quarry?" She nodded, her eyes steady. "Tonight, Mr. Raphael, at a gathering of the guests, I'll need your presence to keep them in place. The truth will come out, but it may be unsettling." Raphael's lips twitched. "I wouldn't miss it. Name the time and place." "The dining room, after dinner," she said. "And please ensure the scarred staff member, his name is Tomas, I've learned is there. He's part of this, though not the mastermind." Raphael raised an eyebrow, but agreed, dispatching a message to Celeste to arrange the gathering. Miss Marple spent the day preparing, her mind as sharp as her knitting needles. She visited Lila, who confirmed Tomas had been seen with Lucky Dyson. Near the kitchens, their voices low and urgent. "He looked scared, ma'am," Lila whispered. "Said he didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You've been brave, Lila. Stay safe tonight." A reluctant accomplice, she thought. But whose? At noon, she encountered Edward Hillingdon in the garden, his satchel open, revealing vials of plant extracts. "Mr. Hillingdon," she said, "your work is remarkable. Have you ever tested those extracts? Some could be quite potent." Edward's face tightened, but he forced a smile. "They're for research, Miss Marple, safely stored, always." His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed a tremor. She nodded, filing away his reaction. Knowledge, but not guilt, she thought. She sought out Joan Prescott, now fully recovered, who was reading on the terrace. "Mrs. Prescott," Miss Marple said, "I'm so glad you're well. Did you ever recall what you drank before your collapse? It might help prevent another incident." Joan's eyes flickered. "Just tea, as I said. Nothing unusual." But her fingers twisted her scarf. "A tell," Miss Marple noted. The day passed in a haze of anticipation. By evening, the dining room was set for the gathering, its long table cleared except for a single hibiscus bloom in a vase. The guests assembled, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Evelyn and Edward Hillingdon, Greg and Lucky Dyson, Cannon and Joan Prescott, Dr. Graham and Thomas, the scarred staff member, who stood nervously by the door. Raphael presided at the head, his presence commanding silence. Miss Marple stood, her lavender dress unassuming, her voice calm but clear. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Major Palgrave's death, Mrs. Prescott's illness, and Mr. Dyson's incident have cast a shadow over our holiday. I believe they are connected, not by chance, but by design." A murmur rippled through the room. Greg shifted, his face flushed. Lucky's smile was brittle, her hand clutching her bracelet. Joan gripped her brother's arm, while Edward stared at the table. Miss Marple continued, her tone gentle but relentless. "Major Palgrave told me of a murderer who used poison, untraceable, to kill repeatedly. He had a photograph, he said, to prove it. He died before showing it. His death deemed a heart attack. But a glossy stain by his bench, a discarded medicine bottle, and his fear suggested otherwise. Then Mrs. Prescott fell ill, and Mr. Dyson was poisoned both after I mentioned a found paper. Someone here is desperate to keep a secret." Lucky laughed, a sharp sound. "This is nonsense. You're spinning stories, Miss Marple." Miss Marple's eyes met hers. "Am I? Let's consider the facts. Major Palgrave was nervous, especially after seeing someone at the bar. He mentioned a photograph, then died. A notebook vanished, a medicine bottle was discarded, and a staff member, Thomas, poured a tainted drink for Mr. Dyson. Thomas, who was seen whispering with you, Mrs. Dyson." All eyes turned to Lucky, whose face paled. "That's absurd," she cried. "Thomas is just a waiter." Thomas stepped forward, his voice shaking. "I didn't know, ma'am. She gave me a vial, said it was for a prank. I didn't mean for anyone to die." The room erupted in gasps. Greg stood, his fists clenched. "Lucky, what's he talking about?" Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing the room. "Mrs. Dyson, you were seen with Mrs. Prescott before her collapse, and with Thomas before Greg's incident. You argued with Greg about something handled. And again last night, when you feared I was too close. The photograph Palgrave had, it showed you, didn't it? From a past you thought buried." Lucky's composure cracked, her eyes wild. "You can't prove anything. That photograph, it's gone. But your actions betray you," Miss Marple said. "You poisoned Palgrave to silence his story, Joan to keep her from talking, and Greg when you feared he'd expose you. The poison came from Edward's collection, didn't it? You stole a vial, knowing its potency. Edward gasped, his face ashen. My collection? I noticed a vial missing, but I never. Lucky's laugh was bitter. You're clever, old woman, but you're wrong. I didn't. Enough. Raphael's voice cut through. Let her finish. Miss Marple nodded. In St. Mary Mead, I saw a woman poison her lover to hide an affair. Your motive was greed, Mrs. Dyson. Palgrave recognized you from a scandal of poisoning in your past, tied to an inheritance. You married Greg for his money, but Palgrave's photograph threatened to expose you. You used Tomas, a desperate man, to do your bidding. Lucky lunged forward, her voice a snarl. You meddling hag. I did it for us, Greg. Me, our future. She stopped, realizing her mistake, as Greg stared, horrified. Tomas broke down, confessing. She paid me, said it was harmless. I didn't know it was poison until Mr. Dyson. The room was silent, the truth laid bare. Dr. Graham stepped forward, his face grim. I should have tested the glass. I suspected, but he shook his head, ashamed. Rayfield signaled the staff, who escorted Lucky away as she shouted denials. Greg followed, his face a mask of betrayal. The Prescotts clung to each other, relieved but shaken. Edward and Evelyn exchanged a glance, their marriage strained but intact. Miss Marple sat, her hands folded. People are the same everywhere, she said softly to Raphael. Greed, fear, love, they drive us to terrible things. Raphael nodded, a rare respect in his eyes. You're a force, Miss Marple. St. Honor, 1T, forget you. The next day, the hotel felt lighter, the shadow lifted. Miss Marple packed her bags, her rheumatism eased by the triumph of truth. As she boarded the plane for St. Mary Mead, she gazed at the island below, its beauty unmarred by its secrets. A puzzle solved, she thought, and a holiday well spent.